Hello everyone, here is Afra Siab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended held on May-June 2017 and paper code is 0625 with variant 42. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1, Part A, first. Speed is a scalar quantity and velocity is a vector quantity. State how a scalar differs from a vector quantity. So here we have to differentiate between the scalar and vector quantity. Scalar quantity has only magnitude, while the vector quantity has magnitude and direction. I write here, scalar has only magnitude, while the vector quantity has magnitude and direction. So basically direction is the factor that is very important in describing the scalars and vector quantity. So we can simply say that a scalar does not have direction while the vectors have direction. So I write here, scalar quantity does not have direction while vector quantity have direction. Part 2. Underline the two scalar quantities in the list below. So here we have to underline the quantities that are scalar. First of all, here is energy, force, impulse, momentum and temperature. So energy is a scalar quantity because it has only magnitude. It does not have specific direction. So first of all, here is our energy, that is a scalar quantity. Second is force. Force is a vector quantity because it has a specific direction. So it is not a scalar quantity. And next is impulse. Impulse is the product of force and time. So it is also a vector quantity. Next is momentum. Momentum is the product of mass and velocity, as velocity is a vector quantity, so the momentum is also a vector quantity. And last one is temperature. Temperature is a scalar quantity because it has only magnitude. It does not have any direction. So there is the part B. A boat is moving at a constant speed. On figure 1.1, sketch a distance time graph for the boat. So first of all, the boat is moving with constant speed. It means that the boat covers equal distance in equal interval of time. Or we can simply say that boat covers distance with the passage of time. So it will be a straight line on distance time graph. I draw here. So this graph actually represents the constant speed. Going towards the next part. Part C. The boat in part B is moving due west at a speed of 6.5 meter per second relative to the water. The water is moving due to south at 3.5 meter per second. In the space below, draw a scale diagram to determine the size and the direction of resultant of these two velocities. State the scale used. So first of all, we have to write scale. Second one, the size of resultant velocity. It means that we have to find out the magnitude of resultant velocity. And last one is direction of the resultant. We also have to find out that in which direction the resultant vector lies. So first of all, it is given that the boat is moving due to west and its speed is 6.5 meter per second. So first of all, here I draw the directions. East, west, north, and here is south. So the boat is moving due to west at a speed of 6.5 meter per second. First of all, speed is 6.5 meter per second. Sorry, here is meter per second. And second speed is 3.5 meter per second. I use a scale that 1 centimeter is equal to 1 meter per second. I write here scale 1 centimeter is equal to 1 meter per second. So 3.5 meter per second will be equal to 3.5 centimeter, and also 6.5 centimeter will be equal to 6.5 meter per second. So we use this scale and draw the diagram. So first vector is in the direction of west. I draw here and its length is 6.5 centimeter. So this is basically a vector whose length is 6.5 centimeter and it is in this direction. I write here 6.5 centimeter. So the water is moving due south at a speed of 3.5 meter per second. So the second vector is in the direction of south and its magnitude is 3.5 centimeter. So I draw it here. So it's the vector whose length is 3.5 centimeter. Now we have to find out the resultant of both of these vectors. So I use the head to tail rule. The resultant will find from the tail of the first vector towards the head of last vector. So I will draw the resultant vector here. It will be like this, in this direction. So this is the resultant vector R, and here is the angle. So first of all, we have to find out the magnitude of resultant vector. We can find out it in two ways. First of all, I use a ruler and find the length of resultant vector. So I will do the same thing. Here it is 1 centimeter, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and almost 7.5. So the resultant vector has magnitude 7.5 centimeter. Second method to find this, as it's a right angle triangle, so we use the Pythagorean theorem that hypotenuse square is equal to base square plus perpendicular square. Here we have to find out the resultant, that is hypotenuse. So it will be equal to square root of base square plus perpendicular square. So I put here values. It is 6.5 square plus 3.5 square. So the value of h comes to be 42.25 plus 12.25. So the value is 7.5 centimeter. This h is basically the resultant. So these are the two methods to find out the resultant magnitude. So I write here, first of all, here I use the unit centimeter, but 1 centimeter is equal to 1 meter per second. So the magnitude of the resultant velocity will be 7.5 meter per second. So I write here, scale is 1 centimeter is equal to 1 meter per second, and the size of resultant velocity is 7.5 meter per second. Next we have to find out the direction of the resultant by using the protractor and keep the protractor in this direction. We can find out this angle, and this angle comes to be 28 degrees. This angle should be in the range of 26 to 30 degrees, and we also see its direction that it is below west and east. So we can simply say that the angle is 28 degrees below east and west because it comes in this direction. So I write here, direction of the resultant will be 28 degrees below east west. So we also have find the magnitude and direction of the resultant. Question number 2. Figure 2.1 shows the vehicle designed to be used on the moon. Here is a figure 2.1 and we can see that there is a vehicle. The brakes of the vehicle are tested on the earth. Part A. The acceleration of free fall on the moon is 1/6 of its value on the earth. It means that acceleration of free fall, that is g, at the surface of moon is 1/6 the value of g at the surface of earth. It means that the acceleration of free fall at the moon is smaller as compared to at the surface of earth. Tick one box in each column of the table to predict the value of the quantity when the vehicle is used on the moon compared to test on the earth. So here we have to compare the different parameters. So first of all, here is mass of the vehicle on moon. Second, the weight of the vehicle on moon and the deceleration of the vehicle on the moon with the same braking force. So first of all, mass is the intrinsic property of a body. It does not change with the freely fall acceleration. So it is a property that a body possesses by itself. So it does not change. It remains same as the surface of earth as well as the surface of moon. Its value remains same. So the value of mass at the surface of moon is equal to the value of mass at the surface of earth. So I take here same as value on the earth. Second one is weight of vehicle on moon. So here we have to compare the weight at the surface of earth and at the moon. So first of all, it is given that the value of G at the surface of moon is 1/6 the value of G at the surface of Earth. Weight is basically the product of mass and free fall acceleration. So here we are testing this weight on the surface of moon. I write here m. It will be mm and gm. So as the mass remains same, so I write here m and gm. Here I write the value of gm. I use this value and the weight at moon will be equal to m into 1/6 g of Earth. It means that weight at the surface of moon is 1/6 m and ge. This value is actually the weight at the surface of Earth. So it means that the weight decreased by 1/6 factor at the moon as compared on the Earth. So here first option is 10 multiply value on the Earth, so it is wrong. And the weight at the moon will be 1/6 the value at the surface of Earth. So the fourth option is correct. I tick here. Last one is deceleration of vehicle on moon with the same braking force. So deceleration is basically the negative acceleration. When we have to decelerate a body, we press the brake and in order to press it, we have to apply the successive forces, and this force causes decelerate the body at rate, but this rate is same. It just depends upon the surface, and we can see here that the surface of moon is not enough to cause the deceleration to be too much great, like 6 multiplied by g or 1/6 the value of g. So the surface is not enough large to cause the deceleration. So we can simply say that the deceleration at the surface of Earth and moon are same. I write here, it remains same. That is here third option. Next part B. Figure 2.2 shows the brake pedal of the vehicle. Here is our figure 2.2. The driver exerts a force on the pedal which increases the pressure in the oil to operate the brake. The area of the piston in the cylinder is 6.5 into 10 to the power 4 meter square, that is also equal to 0.00065 meter square. The pressure increases in the oil is 5.0 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. Calculate the force exerted by the driver on the brake pedal. Here we have to find out the total force that is exerted by the driver on the brake pedal. So here we can see that first of all, here we apply a force on the pedal, and the pedal, if I consider that the initial position of the pedal is like this, then we apply force on it and it displaces and come at this position. So when we exert a force on the pedal, the level of the oil here changes, the pressure increases here. Because we apply a force, force increases, pressure also increases. So basically this pedal move in this direction. So we can simply say that it causes a clockwise movement. But there is also a link. Like here, this also move and causes a movement, and the distance of this from the pivot point is 7.0 centimeter, while the distance of the pedal from the pivot point is 24 centimeter. So first of all, we have to find out the force. So force will be equal to product of pressure and area, because pressure is equal to force over area So this force will be the product of pressure and area. Here, the area of the piston in the cylinder, this is a piston, this acts as a piston and its area is 6.5 into 10 to the power minus 4. I consider at as F1, P1 and A1, that is for the piston of cylinder. So it will be, pressure here is 5.0 into 10 to the power 5 multiplied by area. Area here is 6.5 into 10 to the power minus 4. So this force, that is F1, which is due to the oil, it comes to be 325 Newton. So this force is basically act here. But we have to find out the force that is exerted by the driver here. So these movement must be equal. I write here, the moment that is caused by the pedal must be equal to the moment that is caused by the link or oil in the piston. So I write here, both of these moments are equal and the moment that is caused by the pedal will be the product of force and perpendicular distance from the pivot point. This force actually we have to find out, and if I consider that this force is F2 and here is F1. So F2 multiplied by R2. R2 is basically 24 centimeter. It will be equal to F1, that is here force, multiplied by R1. This R1 is 7.0 centimeter. So I write here F1 multiplied by R1 is equal to F2 multiplied by R2. And we have to find out the value of F2. It will be equal to F1 into R1 divided by R2. F1 here we calculate, it is 325 multiplied by R1. Here it is 7.0 centimeter divided by R2 is perpendicular distance of the pedal from the pivot point, it is 24 centimeter. So the force comes to be 95 Newton. So this is a force that exerted by the driver here in order to press the piston. It is 95 Newton. Question number 3, part A. Underline the pair of quantities which must be multiplied together to calculate impulse. First of all, here is force and mass, force and velocity, mass and time, time and velocity, weight and velocity, and force and time. For that we have to know that what is impulse. Impulse is basically the change of momentum. I write here, impulse is equal to change of momentum, that is mv minus mu, and it is also equal to the product of force and time. So in order to calculate the impulse, we have to multiply force and time, that is the last one. We have to multiply force and time to get the impulse. Part B. Figure 3.1 shows a collision between two blocks A and B on a smooth horizontal surface. There is a figure 3.1 and there are two blocks A and B. The mass of A block is 2.5 kg and the second block B is 1.2 kg. The block A is moving with the speed of 3.0 meter per second towards the right. Before the collision, block A of mass 2.4 kg, it is moving at 3.0 meter per second. Block B of mass 1.2 kg is at rest. The block B is at rest means that its initial velocity is equal to 0. After the collision, the block A and B stick together and move with the velocity v. Here we can see in figure 3.1, after collision, the block A and B stick together and they move with the common velocity, that is v. Part first. Calculate 1. The momentum of the block A before the collision. Here we have to find out the momentum of block A. For that we have to know that what is momentum. Momentum is basically the product of mass and speed. I write here, momentum is the product of mass and velocity. I write here momentum that is represented by P, it is equal to mass multiplied by velocity. So momentum will be equal to, we have to find out it for the block A. I write here A and before collision. It means that we have to consider the diagram that is before the collision. So the mass is given 2.5 kilogram. It will be 2.4 multiplied by the velocity. The speed with which it is moving is 3.0 meter per second. So it is 3.0. So the momentum of block A will be equal to 7.2 Newton second, and it is also equal to 7.2 kilogram meter over second. Both of these are similar units. So momentum will be equal to 7.2 Newton second. Part 2. The velocity v. Here we have to find out the velocity v. Going back to figure, we can see here after collision there is a velocity v. It means that after collision both of these blocks are stick and they move with the common velocity, that is v. The velocity of the block A is same as that of the velocity of the block B after the collision, and we have to find out this velocity. In order to find out this, we use the law of conservation of momentum, that the total momentum of this system remain conserved, or the total initial momentum of the system before collision will be equal to the total final momentum of the system after collision. So I write here total momentum before collision is equal to total momentum after collision. So we can see that before collision there are two blocks A and B. So we have to add the momentum of both of these blocks. I write here initial velocity is UA plus MB It will be equal to the total momentum after the collision. So after collision the two blocks stick together and their mass will be combined, and both of these blocks move with the same velocity v. So I write here MA plus MB into velocity is v. We have to find out the value of this velocity. So putting values here, the mass of A block is given, that is 2.4 kilogram, multiplied by the speed is 3.0, plus for the second block mass is 1.2 multiplied by initial velocity is 0 because the block initially is at rest. So it will be 0. Then again I write here 2.4 plus 1.2 and v. So here we have to find out the value of v. It will be equal to 7.2 is equal to 3.6 v. So the value of v will be equal to 7.2 over 3.6. It is equal to 2.0 meter per second. So the velocity comes to be 2.0 meter per second. Third one is impulse experienced by the block B during the collision. Here we have to find out the impulse of the block B. So impulse is basically the product of force and time, and it is also equal to change in momentum, that is mv minus u. But we have to find out for the block B. So the impulse of block B will be equal to mb vb minus ub, as the initial velocity of the block B is equal to 0 because it is at rest. So IB will be equal to MB and VB. So IB will be equal to, by putting values here, mass of the second block is 1.2 kilogram multiplied by the velocity of the block B, that we already calculate, it is 2.0 meter per second. So write here 2.0. So the impulse of second block comes to be 2.4 Newton second. So I write here impulse is equal to 2.4 Newton second. Next part 2. Suggest why the total kinetic energy of the block A and B after the collision is less than the kinetic energy of the block A before the collision. So the kinetic energy after the collision is less as compared to the kinetic energy before the collision. It is because the kinetic energy transferred to the thermal energy or the sound energy during the collision. So after the collision, the kinetic energy decrease. I write here kinetic energy transfers to thermal energy during collision. So that's why the final kinetic energy or the kinetic energy after collision is small as compared to the kinetic energy before collision. Question number 4. A balloon contains a fixed mass of a gas. Part A. Explain in terms of the momentum of molecules how the gas in the balloon exert a pressure. So the gas that is in the balloon exert a pressure. First of all, here I consider a balloon and the gas molecules are inside this balloon. We know that the gas molecules move randomly because there is a large distance between their molecules. So they collide with each other like this and also collide with the wall of this balloon. So when they collide with the wall of this balloon, they change their direction and bounce back. So there will be the change in momentum. I write here change in momentum. And when these molecules collide with the wall of this balloon, they exert a force. Or we can simply say that the change in momentum causes the force because F cross T is equal to delta P. When there is change in momentum, there is also the force. And we know that pressure is equal to force over area. When there is a force, the pressure also exert. It means that a balloon that contains a gas, there will be the pressure that is exerted on the walls of the balloon. This is because of the change in momentum, because the gas molecules collide randomly and change their direction after every collision. So there will be the change in momentum and force. So I write here, first of all, molecules collide with each other and with the walls of balloon. So when they collide with the walls of the balloon, they change their direction and bounce back. and this change in momentum result in the force, or this change in momentum causes the force, and pressure is equal to force over area. So there will be the pressure exerted on the walls of balloon. Part 2. Explain in terms of molecules why the pressure of the gas increases when the volume of the balloon decreases. The temperature of the gas is constant. So here temperature is kept constant, and when we decrease the volume of the balloon, the pressure increases. So we have to explain its reason. So first of all, when we decrease the volume of the balloon, it will be like this. We decrease the volume, but we have to keep the temperature constant. So the volume decrease, the particles collide more frequently with the walls of the balloon and reduces the area. There will be frequently collision. Which causes the reduction in area. So this creates the change in pressure, because pressure is equal to force over area. When the area decrease, pressure increase. So we can simply say that when we decrease the volume at the constant temperature, the particles collide more frequently with the walls of the balloon and reduces the area, due to which the pressure increases. So I write here, when volume is decreased, particles collide more frequently with walls of the balloon. And reduce the area. So as we know that pressure is equal to force over area, the reduced area causes the pressure to increase. So in this way, when we kept the temperature constant and decrease the volume, the pressure increases. Next part, C. The initial volume of the gas is 500 cubic centimeter and its pressure is 1.1 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal. The volume is reduced to 200 cubic centimeter. The temperature of gas is constant. Calculate the new pressure. Here we are given that initial volume and pressure. Initial pressure is 1.1 into 10 to the power 5 Pascal and volume is 500 cubic centimeter. The volume reduced to 200 cubic centimeter. It is the final volume, that is 200 cubic centimeter, and we have to find out the new pressure, that is P2. Here we kept the temperature constant by using the Boyle's law that pressure is inversely proportional to volume. by keeping the temperature constant. I write here pressure is inversely proportional to volume at constant temperature. So when we arrange this equation, it becomes PV is equal to constant, and we have to write it as P1V1 is equal to P2V2. So here P1 is given 1.1 into 10 की power 5 multiplied by volume is 500 cubic centimeter. P2 we have to find out this, and here final volume is 200 cubic centimeter. So P2 will be equal to 1.1 into 10 की power 5 multiplied by 500 divided by 200. So the pressure, that is new pressure, comes to be 2.8 into 10 की power 5 Pascal. So I write here 2.8 into 10 की power 5 Pascal. It is the new pressure. We can also see from here that the initial pressure is 1.1 into 10 की power 5 Pascal and the volume is 500 cubic centimeter. When we decrease the volume, its pressure increases. There is 2.8 into 10 की power 5 Pascal. Question number 5, part A. First, an electric kettle contains 600 grams of water at 20 degrees C. The heater in the kettle operates at 240 volt. The specific heat capacity of water is 4200 joule per kg per degree C. The current in the heater is 12 ampere. Calculate the time taken for the temperature of the water to rise to 100 degrees C. So first of all, initial temperature is 20 degrees C and the final temperature is 100 degrees C. We have to calculate the time taken for the temperature to change from 20 to 100 degrees C. For that, we are given the specific heat capacity. We use the formula that E is equal to, that is energy, M, C and delta T. Here M is mass, C is specific heat capacity and delta T is change in temperature. So in order to calculate time, we know that power is equal to rate of energy transfer, that is energy over time. Here we have to find out time. It will be equal to energy over power. Here we can see that current is 12 ampere and heater operate at 240 volt, that is the potential difference. So power is basically the product of current and potential difference. I write here E over IV. In order to calculate the time, we have to know about the energy. So first of all, we calculate the value of energy from this formula. Here we can see that M is mass, that is given here 600 gram. So the standard unit of mass is kilogram and we have to convert this gram into kilogram. It will be 600 divided by 1000 gram. So this comes to be 0.6 kilogram. I write here E is equal to So in order to convert this gram into kilogram, I divide it with 1000. So it becomes kilogram. It is equal to 0.6 kilogram. Now I am going to put values here. Energy will be equal to mass is 0.6 multiplied by C, that is specific heat capacity, it is 4200 multiplied by change in temperature. So first of all, temperature is 20 degrees C and after that here is 100 degrees C. So change in temperature will be 100 minus 20. So the value of energy will be equal to 0.6 multiplied by 4200 and 80 degrees C. So energy comes to be this value. So this is a value of energy. I put this value of energy into this formula to find out time. So time will be equal to the value of energy divided by current is 12 ampere and voltage is 240 volt. So that time comes to be 70 seconds. I write here time is equal to 70 seconds. Next part 2. State one assumption you made in your calculation in A part first. So here I assume that no thermal energy is lost to the surrounding. So I write here no thermal energy is lost to surrounding. Going towards the next part. Part B. Using the apparatus shown in figure 5.1, describe an experiment to demonstrate good and bad emitters of thermal radiation. Include the expected result and the conclusion. So first of all, we can see in figure 5.1, there is a metal water bottle. So one side is black while the other side is white. There are also two thermometers and a supply of hot water and a ruler. You may use a diagram. We can also draw the diagram for this experiment. So first of all, first step is we take a bottle and fill it with the water, that is hot water. So when we fill it with hot water, I draw here diagram also. So one end of this bottle is black while the other is white. So first of all, I draw here a line. So here it is black. While the other side is white. So I fill this bottle with water. I suppose that here is water. And next step is that we place a thermometer that are given in the figure at equal distance on both sides of this bottle. So I place here thermometer at equal distance. So I suppose that I place this thermometer at a distance of 1 centimeter. that is at this point, and there is also 1 centimeter at this point. So place thermometer here. So we place a thermometer at equal distance on both sides of this bottle. So here we expect that the temperature of the thermometer that is closer to the black is higher, because black is a good emitter. Most of the radiations are emitted, and as a result there will be larger temperature. But the side that is white is not a good emitter, so there will be less temperature recorded by the thermometer, that is on the white side. So I write here, first of all place hot water in the bottle. And measure the initial temperature of water. Next step is that place the thermometer at equal distance from the black and white side. It is expected that black color is a good emitter. So when this experiment is conducted, it was found that the black side is emitted more heat resulting in the more reading on the thermometer. So we can simply say that the reading on the thermometer increases, that is on the black side. So black side is a good emitter of heat. Question number 6, part A. The graph in figure 6.meter, while on the vertical axis there is vertical position and it is also in centimeter. Using figure 6.1, determine part first. The amplitude of the wave. Here we have to find out the amplitude of the wave. For that we have to know about that what is amplitude. So amplitude is actually the maximum distance of a body from its mean position. I write here maximum distance of a body from its mean position or mean line. So going back to figure 6.1, we can see here that here is a wave produced on a wave. This line is basically the mean line or mean position. I write here mean position. So we have to take the maximum distance from the mean position. I take a ruler and measure this distance. First of all, I draw this. It will be this distance. On all the waves, this distance is basically equal to amplitude, and on the vertical axis here is 4.0 and it is 6.0. So distance from this to this point is basically 2.0 centimeter. Next, at this point it is 7.0. So this is also above 2 points. It will be 7.4. So basically 7.4 minus 4.0. This is the amplitude and it is equal to 3.4 centimeter. So this distance is basically equal to 3.4 centimeter. I write here the amplitude of this wave is 3.4 centimeter. Next, part 2, the wavelength of the wave. Here we have to find out the wavelength. First of all, wavelength is the distance between two consecutive crust or trough. I write here distance between two consecutive crust or trough is equal to wavelength. So going back to figure, we can see that this is the mean line and the portion of the wave above mean line is actually crust, while the portion of the wave below the mean line is trough. So the wavelength is basically the distance between two consecutive crust or trough. First crust start from this point and it moves in this way, and from this point the second crust starts. So we have to measure this distance. It is actually equal to wavelength. So on the scale it starts from 0 and here is 40 centimeter. So this distance is basically 30 centimeter. So we can simply say that the wavelength is equal to 30 centimeter. I write here wavelength is 30 centimeter. So going towards the next part of this question. Part B. A wave traveling on the surface of water has a wavelength of 2.5 centimeter and speed of 8.0 centimeter per second. Calculate the frequency of the wave. Here we have to find out the frequency by using relation that V is equal to f lambda, where V is the speed, f is frequency and lambda is wavelength. We have to find out f. It will be equal to V over lambda. V is 8.0 centimeter over second and lambda is 2.5 centimeter. We see here that both of these are centimeter, that's why there is no need to convert centimeter into meter. So the frequency comes to be 3.2 Hertz. So frequency is equal to 3.2 Hertz. Part C. The wave in part B approaches a barrier that has a large gap in its center. Figure 6.2 shows the crest of the wave viewed from the above. The gap in the barrier is larger than the wavelength lambda. Part 1. On figure 6.2, draw the pattern formed by three crusts after the wave passes through the gap in the barrier. So we have to draw the pattern. First of all, we have to consider this point that the gap in the barrier is larger as compared to wavelength. If I consider this gap is d, so this d is much larger as compared to wavelength. So if this condition is satisfied, there will be less diffraction. Other condition is that if this gap is less than wavelength, then there will be more diffraction. Diffraction is actually the bending of light. Now in our case, the gap is larger as compared to wavelength, so there will be less diffraction. When this crust comes on the other side of barrier, they will be like this. They will be straight, but there is very small bending at the corners. And you have to be careful that the distance between these waves must be same before and after passing through the barrier. Here it is lambda and this distance is also equal to lambda. So these are the wave fronts after the pass through the barrier when the gap in the barrier is very large as compared to wavelength. Part 2. Water is added to the tank and the speed of wave in the deeper water is greater than that of the shallower water. So here in the deeper water, the speed is larger. The frequency of the waves remains same, but the wavelength is different. The main point is that frequency is constant, but the wavelength is different. Part first, state and explain how the wavelength in the deeper water has changed. So here we have to explain the effect on the wavelength. So here I write deep water and shallower water. It is given that the speed in deep water is greater. Here speed is greater, here speed is less, but frequency is same in both of these. So we have to explain the effect on the wavelength using the relation that V is equal to f lambda. If frequency remains same, then V is directly proportional to lambda. If the speed decreases, the wavelength also decreases. If the speed increase, the wavelength also increase. Both of these are directly proportional to each other. So, in the question we have to explain the wavelength in the deeper water. We can see here that the speed of the wave in deeper water is greater. So, the wavelength in the deeper water must be larger. I write here wavelength is larger because speed is greater. Next, part 2. Apart from the change in wavelength, describe one other difference in the pattern formed by the crust after the wave passes through the gap. So here we see that the wavelength larger means that wavelength increases. So wavelength increase, it means that gap between the barrier decrease. So going back, if the wavelength increase, then wavelength becomes larger as compared to the gap. So second condition meets here, that wavelength is larger as compared to the gap in the barrier. So in this case there will be more diffraction, or we can say that in this case there will be more bending. So I write here there will be more bending or diffraction. Question number 7, part A. The speed of light in air is 3.0 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. The speed of light in a transparent liquid is 2.0 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. A ray of light is incident on the surface of liquid at an angle of incidence of 40 degrees. Calculate, part first, the refractive index of the liquid. So, in this part we have to calculate the refractive index of the liquid when the speed of light in air and the transparent liquid is given, and also the angle of incident is given. We know that refractive index is the ratio of speed of light in air to the speed of light in any medium. I write here n is equal to c over v, where c is the speed of light in air and v is the speed of light in medium. In this case, medium is transparent liquid. So I write here c is 3.0 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second and v is 2.0 into 10 to the power 8. It will be 3.0 over 2.0. So the refractive index will be equal to 1.5. We can see here that refractive index is the ratio of same quantities, that is speed. So it does not have any unit. I write here refractive index is equal to 1.5. Next, part 2. The angle of refraction in the liquid. Here we have to find out the value of angle of refraction. So first of all, in the question the angle of incident is given. So using the formula that refractive index is the ratio of sine of angle of incidence to the sine of angle of refraction. So I write here n is equal to sine function of angle of incidence over sine function of angle of refraction. Here we have to find out the angle of refraction. It will be sine of r is equal to sine of I over n, and r is equal to sine inverse of sine I over n. So the angle of refraction will be equal to sine inverse of sine of angle of incidence. Here it is given 40 degree. So I write here 40 degrees divided by the refractive index that we calculate in the first part. It is equal to 1.5. So angle of refraction becomes 25 degrees. I write here angle of refraction is equal to 25 degree. So going towards the next part of this question. Here is part B. Figure 7.1 shows a side view of an object at the bottom of the tank of liquid. Light travels slower in this liquid than in air. So the speed of the light in the liquid is smaller as compared to in the air. On figure 7.1, draw two rays from the object into the air. Use these rays to locate the image. Label this image I. So here we can see that there is a figure 7.1 and there is a liquid inside a tank and outside there is air. Object is located inside this liquid and its position is at the bottom of this tank. We have to draw the two rays from the object into the air. So here are two medium. First is liquid and other is air. So when the ray of light enters from one medium to another, there will be the refraction. So I draw its path. First of all, I draw normal ray here. It's the normal ray, two medium, air and liquid. So there will be the refraction. I draw the path of these rays. So this is the first ray that comes at the boundary, and after refraction it enters into the eye. So it will be like this. Also we have to draw the next ray. So that after refraction at the surface it enters into the eye. We can see here that both of these rays does not meet at a single point. It means that we have to extend these rays backward in the liquid. The point where both of these rays intersect is basically the position of image. Now I am going to draw them in backward direction. So this point is basically the location of image. And I have to label it with I. So in this way we locate the location of image. Question number 8. Figure 8.1 shows the 12.0 volt power supply connected in a circuit. Here is the figure 8.1 and there is a power supply whose voltage is 12.0 volt. The circuit includes a lamp. Here is a lamp that is in series with the power supply and a resistance wire AB of constant cross-section area. Here is a sliding contact that can be moved between A and B. So there is a sliding contact and it can be moved between A and B. Part A. The rating of the lamp at normal brightness is 6.0 volt and 9.0 watt. Calculate part first. The current in the lamp at normal brightness. Here we have to find out the value of current at the normal brightness. And we are given that at the normal brightness, potential difference is 6.0 volt and power is 9.0 watt. So, I write here, power is the product of current and potential difference. But here we have to find out the value of current. It will be equal to power over potential difference. Power is given, that is 9.0 watt, divided by potential difference is 6.0 volt. So the value of current comes to be 1.5 ampere. I write here current is equal to 1.5 ampere. Part 2. The resistance of the lamp at normal brightness. So in the second part, we have to calculate the resistance of the lamp at the normal brightness. We know that Ohm's law is V is equal to IR. It means that potential difference is directly proportional to the current. And here R is a resistance that is constant. So here we have to find out the value of R. It will be equal to V over I, where V is the potential difference, which is 6.0 volt, over the value of current is 1.5 ampere, that we already calculate in part first. So that the value of resistance comes to be 4 ohm. Ohm is the unit of resistance. I write here, resistance is equal to 4 ohm. Going towards the next part, part B. AB is 1.00 meter long and has a resistance of 5.0 ohms. The lamp has normal brightness when the sliding contact is at X. So part 1. The sliding contact moved to point B. Explain without a calculation why the lamp became dimmer. So going back to figure. Here it is given that the length of AB is 1.00 meter and its resistance is 5 ohm. So first of all, sliding contact is at this position, but when we move it at B, here it is given that sliding contact is moved at point B. Then the lamp become dimmer. So when the sliding contact is at this point, the lamp become dimmer. We have to explain its reason. So here we can see that when the sliding contact is moved from X to B, the distance increases. First of all, distance is AX, but now the distance is AB. So when the distance increase, the resistance also increase. I write here, distance increase, due to which the resistance increase. And according to Ohm's law, V is equal to IR. Potential is same. So the current is inversely proportional to resistance. When the resistance increase, current decrease, due to which the lamp become dimmer. So the lamp becomes dimmer is due to the reason that resistance increases as the distance increase. I write here, resistance increases as distance increases. By increasing the resistance, current becomes low, due to which the lamps become dimmer. Part 2. Calculate the distance AX for the lamp to have normal brightness. So here we have to find out the value of AX. The distance of AX. Going back, here we can see that here is AX. From this point to this, we have to find out this distance. If I say that this distance is X, in order to calculate this distance, we have to find out the resistance of A and X. So, for that we have to find out the equivalent resistance of this circuit, because you can see that there is a wire AB and the lamp that are connected in series, and the overall resistance, that is the equivalent resistance in the series combination, is the sum of all the resistance. So I simply write here total resistance of the circuit will be equal to resistance of lamp plus resistance of AX. First of all, I use the formula that V is equal to IR. So first of all, I calculate R, it will be V over I, where V is the potential difference across the circuit and I is the current that is flowing through the circuit. So it is given that battery has a potential of 12.0 volt and the current that is flowing is 1.5 ampere. This current is basically flowing through the lamp, but in the series circuit the current remains same. So the current through the circuit will be 1.5 ampere. I write here 12 divided by 1.5, it is equal to 8 ohm. So this is the resistance of the whole circuit. So I write here it is 8 ohms. It will be equal to the resistance of lamp that we already calculate here. It is 4 ohms. So I write here 4 plus resistance of AX. So resistance AX comes to be 8 minus 4 is equal to 4 ohms. Now we know that it is given here. First of all, length is 1.00 meter and resistance is 5.0 ohms of the whole wire AB. So I make a table here, distance, R length and resistance. It is given that 1.00 meter long and the resistance is 5.0. So first resistance is 5.0, it is in ohms and distance is in meter and it is 1.00 meter. Second, we have to find out the distance AX. So I write here AX, which is the distance, and for AX the resistance is 4 ohms. So here will be 4. By cross multiplying here, it will be AX multiplied by 5.0. It is equal to 4 multiplied by 1.00. So AX will be equal to 4 into 1.00 divided by 5.0. So the distance AX will be equal to 4 over 5.0. Here is 4.00. So it is 0.80 meter. So distance AX will be equal to 0.80 meter. Question number 9. Figure 9.1 shows a horizontal wire PQ placed in the gap between the north pole and the south pole of the magnet. Here is the figure 9.1 and we can see that there is a wire PQ and this arrow shows the direction of current. It means that current flowing from P towards Q. And this wire is placed in the magnetic field that has two poles, north pole and south pole. There is a current in the wire in the direction P to Q. A force acts on the current carrying wire in the magnetic field. Part A. On figure 9.1, draw part first, an arrow labeled M to show the direction of the magnetic field in the gap between the poles of the magnet. So here we have to show the direction of the magnetic field. So going back to figure, we can see here that two poles of magnet, north and south pole, and the magnetic field is always points from north to south direction. So that's why in this case the direction of magnetic field will be from left to right. I draw arrow in the direction. So this is the direction of magnetic field and we have to label it with M. Next part 2. An arrow labeled F to show the direction of the force on the current carrying wire due to the magnetic field on the magnet. So first of all, here we have to find out the direction of force and have to label this with F. In order to find out the direction of force, we can see in figure 9.1 that current is flowing from P to Q while the magnetic field is from left to right. So in order to calculate the force, we use the Fleming left hand rule. According to this rule, if I consider my left hand in such a way that forefinger, middle finger and the thumb, all of these are mutually perpendicular to each other, and I point out my middle finger in the direction of current and forefinger in the direction of magnetic field. Then my thumb will point out the direction of the force. I write here middle finger, thumb and forefinger are mutually perpendicular. Then, if I point my middle finger in the direction of current, forefinger in the direction of magnetic field, then my thumb points out the direction of magnetic force. So by using this rule, I observe that the direction of magnetic force will be downward. So here the magnetic field is in this direction while the current is flowing from P to Q. It is in upward direction like this. It is in upward direction like this. So the direction of the magnetic force will be downward. It will be in this direction. So this is basically the direction of the magnetic force. Going towards the next part, B. State the effect of reversing the direction of the current in wire PQ. Here when we reverse the direction of the current, what will be the effect? So here if I consider that first of all current is flowing from P to Q, no, if I consider that current is flowing from Q to P like this. Then I again use the flaming left hand rule, and then I see that this force is not in downward direction but it will be in upward direction. So this means that by changing the direction of current, the direction of the force also changes. So I write here, direction of the force will be reverse. Next part C. The magnet is removed and the horizontal current carrying wire is left on its own as shown in figure 9.2. Now we have removed the magnet. Part first, on figure 9.2, draw the pattern of the magnetic field due to the current in the wire. Indicate the field direction. So here we have to draw the pattern of magnetic field. So first of all, here we have to use the rule, that is right hand rule. That current is flowing from P to Q. I just point my thumb in the direction of the current and then my curling fingers will show the direction of magnetic field. So I write here, right hand rule. First point out your thumb in the direction of current. Then your curling finger point the direction of magnetic field. So current is flowing in upward direction and when I curl my finger, then they will be in clockwise direction. So the magnetic field lines is actually circular and the magnetic field direction will be clockwise direction. So here I will draw this. These are circular lines. And the direction will be clockwise like this. Second part, the current in PQ is increased. So here we have to increase the value of current in this wire. State the effect of this change in the current of magnetic field. So the magnetic field will be stronger because in this case the magnetic field lines gets closer to each other. So I write here, magnetic field will be stronger because magnetic field lines get closer by increasing current. So going towards the next part of this question, part D. The small magnet is placed at a point where the magnetic field is vertically upward. So here the magnetic field is vertically upward State the direction of the force on the S pole of the small magnet. So first of all, here it is given that the magnetic field is vertically upward, and then we place a small magnet and have to state the direction of force on the south pole. So first of all, considering the previous part that here the magnetic field is from north to south and current is flowing. So in this case, the direction of the magnetic force will be downward direction. So if I place a small magnet here, then the magnetic field of the small magnet will be very small, that it is not enough to drastically interact with the field of this magnet and move in the other direction. So it does not have sufficient effect on this. The direction of the magnetic force in this case will be remains vertically downward. I write here the direction will be vertically downward. Question number 10, part A. In the space, draw the standard symbol for a light emitting diode, that is LED. Here we have to draw the symbol for the light emitting diode. For that I use a ruler and draw its symbol. So it's a symbol for LED. We can see that these arrows shows that light is emitted from here. Part B. Table 10.1 shows the truth table for a logic gate. Here is a table 10.1 and there we can see that input 1 and input 2 and there is a single output. State the name of the logic gate which has this truth table. So first of all, we have to tell the name of this logic gate that used here. The inputs are 0, 0, output is 1. Second combination is input 0 and 1 while the output is 0. Third one is input 1 and 0, output is also 0. And last one combination, input both are 1 and the output is 0. First of all, I draw the table for the OR gate. Here I draw the output for OR gate. So for the OR gate, when both of the inputs are low, output will be low. But when any one of the input is high, output will be high. So I write here OR gate. For 0, 0 inputs, output will be 0. For 0, 1 input, output is 1 because here 1 is high. So that's why output will be high. Next combination is 1 and 0. Here 1 is again high. So the output will be 1. And last one is 1, 1. Here both of the inputs are high. The output will be high. So these are the output of OR gate. So the output that here shown is basically the output when we apply NOT gate over the OR. NOT gate is basically the gate of inversion. It changes 0 into 1 and 1 into 0. One into 0 and 0 into 1. We can see from here that the output of OR gate is 0. So when we apply NOT gate over it, it becomes 1. Next here is 1 and it becomes 0. So here is 1, it again becomes 0. It means that we have applied NOT gate over OR. So this gate is basically for NOR. These outputs are basically for NOR gate. So this logic gate is NOR gate. Part C. It is possible to connect together the two inputs of the gate in part B. Using two or more of the logic gates in part B, design a circuit with two inputs and one output which has the truth table shown in table 10.2. So here we can see that there is a table 10.2. There are two inputs, input 1 and input 2. There is also intermediate point X and output. There is only one output but two inputs. Try your circuit in the space below. There is no need to use the symbol for the logic gate. Boxes with the two inputs and one output are sufficient. So first of all, in the part B, there is NOR gate. It means that we have to combine two NOR gates. So I draw here NOR gate. It has two inputs. So these are two inputs and here I have to draw the NOR gate. This is basically OR gate and we have to apply NOT over it. So I place a bubble here. This is NOR gate. Because we have to connect it the two NOR gate, that's why there are again two inputs. And here I made NOR gate again. And this has single output. I write here output. This is input 1 and 2. Now first of all, I consider two inputs. This is the truth table for NOR gate. I just write here. This is truth table for NOR gate. It is input 1, this is input 2 and this is output. So considering this table, if I take here that this input is 0 and this input is also 0. So when both of the inputs are 0, 0, output is 1. So I write here it is 1. So this 1 is also here 1 and it is also here 1. So here 1, 1 are the inputs of next NOR gate. So when there is 1, 1, the output is 0. So I write here 0 is output. It means that when the input is 0 and 0, the output is also 0. Here first input is 0 and second input is also 0, output is also 0. Now I consider other case like 0, 1. If I consider that this input is 0 and it is 1, so when this 0 and 1 combines through the NOR gate, then it gives 0 output. So this 0 output is basically the input of the next NOR gate. So there is 0 and 0. So this 0 and 0 gives 1. So here is the output 1. It means that when inputs are 0 and 1, which is second case 0 and 1, the output is 1. And now consider the last one case, that is 1 and 1. If I consider that both of these inputs are 1, then the output is 0. So I write here 0. This 0 is basically the input of next NOR gate. So this 0, 0 combination gives 1. So the output is 1. It means that when both of the inputs are 1 and 1, the output is also 1, which is the last one case. So it means that when we combine two NOR gate, then we get these output values, and this intermediate point is basically NOR gate. So I write here the values of NOR gate. It will be 1, 0, 0 and 0. Here is part B. Label an intermediate point of your circuit with the letter X. Complete the table with the logic level for this point in the blank column of the table. So this table, that is X, is basically the NOR gate. So it will be here, it is X. And you also have to complete the truth table, that is 10.2. Question number 11, part A. The arrows in figure 11.1 represents the path of the 3 alpha particles moving towards the gold nuclei in the thin foil. The gold nuclei are shown as shaded circle. So these circles are basically represents the gold nuclei. On figure 11.1, complete the path of 3 alpha particles. So this arrow basically shows that alpha particles are coming towards the gold nuclei. In the first figure, this is the path of alpha particle, while these are gold nuclei. So first of all, we know that alpha particles are positively charged, and these are actually helium nuclei. And gold nuclei also be positively charged. It means that both of these have same kind of charge, So both of these repel each other because same charges repel each other while the opposite charges attract each other. In the figure, first we can see that the alpha particle approaching to the gold nuclei, and here it is positively charged, this is also positive and this is also positive. So first of all, I consider that this alpha particle coming here, both of these repel each other, due to which this alpha particle does not move in upward direction. Same in the case of downward gold nuclei, there will be a force of repulsion between this gold nuclei and alpha particle, due to which there will also be the repulsion, and this alpha particle does not move in downward direction. So because of the repulsion of both of these gold nuclei, the alpha particles move in the separate path. So I draw here the path of this alpha particle. It will be straight. So this is the path of alpha particles. Now we can see here the second figure, that gold nuclei are here and alpha particles are approaching this gold nuclei, and when this alpha particle come closer to gold nuclei, then there will be the repulsion, due to which this alpha particles move backward. So I draw its path here, that it will be scattered in backward direction, like this. And in the third case, the gold nuclei are upward while the alpha particles are approaching in downward. So both of these repel each other, due to which instead of alpha particle moving upward, it moves in downward direction and deflected in downward direction. So I draw its path here. They move like this and then deflected by this gold nuclei and move in downward direction. So this is the path of these three alpha particles. Going towards the next part. Part B. Figure 11.2 shows a geologist holding a radiation detector near a rock. She holds the detector in a fixed position and records the reading shown in table 11.1. Here is the table 11.1 and there is time measured in minutes and the detector reading, that is count per second. Explain the change in the detector reading. So first of all, in table 11.1 we can see that when time equal to 0 minute, then the count per minute is 16. So when time increases and become 1 minute, then the count rate decrease and it becomes 14. When time t is equal to 2 minutes, then count rate increase and it becomes 17. When t is equal to 3 minutes, then the count rate is small, it even decrease as compared to its original value, because originally it is 16 and now it is 13. It simply means that there is a random change in the count rate, and this is basically due to the background radiation. So I write here, radiation varies as at t is equal to 1 minute, count rate is 14. At 2 minutes, it is higher, that is 17 counts per minute. But it has lower value at t is equal to 3. This could happen because of the background radiation. Next part C. A technician is handling a solid radioactive sample that emits alpha particles and beta particles. The technician wears the thick rubber gloves. Explain why this may provide some protection from the radiation, but it is not sufficient protection because here are two particles, alpha particle and beta particle. So these gloves, in some cases it is very useful, but in some cases it is not sufficient to protect. It is because of the reasons that these gloves can stop the alpha particles, but the beta radiations penetrate through the gloves. So these gloves protect the technician from the alpha radiation but not from the beta radiation. I write here, it would protect technician from alpha particles but not from beta particles. So that's why in some cases these are not sufficient to protect the technician.